welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. On this 347th episode, we're talking about fly fishing, but we're actually also talking about spin fishing. Now, why in the world would you tune into a fly fishing podcast to hear about something that is not fly fishing? First of all, I think I've made it known that I'm kind of fishing agnostic in the sense that I prefer to fly fish. I fly fish probably 19 out of 20 times I'm out on the water, but I'm not against using other methods and techniques. And today I'm going to really talk about 3 circumstances and situations in which spinning gear might be the better way to go. All right. So I'm not saying that you have to, and I'm saying that this is probably just an option. And especially if someone is new to angling, and you'll find more and more these days where folks are not growing up fishing and then transitioning into fly fishing. A lot of people these days are just starting off fly fishing. They have a friend, they go on a trip, something happens, and they are exposed to fly fishing, and that's the only kind of fishing that they are accustomed to engaging in. Maybe 25 years ago, that wasn't necessarily the case, where most folks who fly fished probably started off fishing with a spin casting reel, a casting reel, or a spinning reel. And so I think it's kind of appropriate for me to talk about why it's okay to use those and the circumstances in which using those is a appropriate thing to do and might even be a good way to spend your time on the water in a particular situation. First of all, let me define terms. So if you watch bass fishing, on TV, which I mean, why not? It's a great time. That kind of reel that they're more likely using is a casting reel. That's where effectively the wind is happening perpendicular to the line coming in. So it's that kind of reel where the reel is on top of the rod, and they're reeling in usually with their dominant hand, and it offers a lot of control because that line is in a direct line. The spool is perpendicular to the line, so it's a nice direct contact. That's a great way to fish, and again, that's the way that most professionals do it. Then we have spin casting. Well, what's that? That's your Snoopy rod. That's your little Zebco 44, where it's encased. And there it's a little bit different, where you have your line is coming down and there's a bail or some sort of clip that is forcing that line to go onto that reel, which the spool of that reel is running parallel with that line. So you have not as great of a connection, but still we're talking about very few circumstances in which that's going to compromise your ability to fish. That's a great way to fish, and that's the way that a lot of people start off, especially if they start off as kids. But I would say the nice, medium, middle of the road way to approach using conventional gear is a spinning reel, which is effectively a spin casting reel with that case off of it, and it allows for finesse work. A lot of people who fish for trout using conventional gear will use that spinning rod and reel combo. And they can be as simple and basic as something for $20 from Walmart, or you can spend upwards of $1,000 on a combo, just like you can with fly fishing. But with that out of the way, let's talk about, first of all, why people are down on this, especially within the trout fishing world. You don't see this in much as the guys that are fishing for bass with fly gear. They kind of just live alongside and exist equally with folks using conventional gear. The same thing with saltwater, and even with the bait at that point. Everyone's kind of just after the same thing. It's such a complicated process that everyone just realizes, let's go out and do this however we can. But within trout world, there's this kind of sideways look at folks using conventional gear. And I think the main reason why, and there's some legitimacy to it, is that conventional gear has a greater chance of harming a fish and increasing fish mortality for a few reasons. One, the majority of conventional lures that you are going to purchase off the shelf are going to employ at least one treble hook, those 3 hooked hooks. And those really do increase the chances of causing damage to not just the fish's mouth, which I'm not as concerned about. I mean, you're going to be doing that one way or another, but especially if they get hooked deeper. Now, if you're using bait and a treble hook, you increase that significantly because that fish is going to swallow that. Oftentimes with the fly, they're just getting it in the mouth. I can't remember the last time I deep hooked a fish, even on a streamer with a fly, but using conventional gear, that's something you do have to be aware of. And so that's one of the reasons why folks are a little bit down on conventional gear, spinning gear, especially bait fishing when fishing for trout. But it doesn't have to be that way. Like I said, it doesn't have to be where you kill every fish that you hook. Certainly, every fish that you land, you can always take off your treble hooks, and that's actually a big initiative in a lot of circumstances, including striped bass fishing, especially up in the Northeast where I am. The folks taking off the treble hooks and putting on single hooks, which too allows for a little bit more of a secure hook set. Think about this. I know I'm kind of going off on a rabbit trail, but if you were to hook a fish in the lower jaw with one of those treble hooks, and the other two hooks are exposed, and that fish closes its mouth, as it may do, now those two hooks become a leverage point where that fish, by its upper jaw applying pressure on that hook, can now leverage that hook out of its mouth. That's not going to happen with a single hook. So that's just one example of where taking off the treble hooks and putting in single hooks is not going to necessarily inhibit your ability to catch fish. In some situations, it might actually increase your ability to catch fish. And that's true for stripers, that's true for trout. So let's talk about three situations where I think spinning gear is worthwhile, and I'll give some anecdotal stories to go along with it. The first one is one actually I've been doing the last few days. I've been trying to catch bass with fly gear on a little reservoir in Virginia, and it has been doing nothing but rain. The water is high, the water is muddy, and the fish are just not responding to the poppers that I have with my fly rod. They're not responding to the streamers either. But as soon as I threw on a little Rapala minnow or Rapala, depending on where you're from, I suppose, I started getting action. And so this is a really effective way to drum up fish in high water. This is true in lakes. This is true in streams. When the water is high, you can do a few things with spinning gear a lot easier than you can with fly gear. One is making noise. Yes, I know that there are flies that have been designed to move water. There's been, materials you can integrate into your fly that will cause there to be vibrations, allowing those fish's lateral lines to cue in on something moving through that muddy water. And I have caught plenty of great trout and other fish in high muddy water on fly gear. But for me, trying to pattern in what's going on here and do it relatively quickly, using spinning gear was much, much more efficient. The same thing is true of topwater. I have poppers that do some great work. I have some cup face poppers that really displace a lot of water when fishing with a fly rod, but they're not going to rattle and they're not going to have the same amount of side to side action as some of these topwater plugs that I have for my spinning gear. And so I was able to pattern that in. And who's to say that I'm not going to switch back to a fly rod once the water kind of comes down and the color returns more to normal. So that's one of the first things that I would say is when the water is high and muddy, then you have those benefits. Also getting down in moving water. I don't fish a lot of spoons, but I have, and in high muddy water on moving water, throwing a spoon on a light line, 6-pound test, is a great way to get that lure down in front of those fish. And it really happens in a much easier way, especially if you are fishing across and down, than if you were to use fly gear. Yes, you can use a weighted line, you can use a poly leader, and I do that if I'm in a situation where I have to because of the regulations. But there's times where I know there's fish there, and I want to get down to them, and I'll throw a small lure, whether it be a small diving crankbait or a spinner or a small spoon, all of which you can fish with the single hooks, and it can get down there and down there quickly. Now, I don't do this very much. I'll be very frank. I'm advocating it as an option for others. I personally don't do it a lot. I have done it a few times in my life, but it's not something I do regularly. This is more of something that I do when I am patterning and chasing after warm water fish when the water is high and muddy. For trout, I will oftentimes kind of muscle it out and tough it out using fly gear. But that's only because I'm always holding out hope that a hatch is going to happen and I'm going to be able to start, switch over my gear and fish with dry flies. But that's the first one: high and muddy water, and then adding in on moving water when it's fast water. Switching over spinning gear, as long as the regulations permit, is a completely fine way to pursue those fish and maybe even salvage a fishing trip. I think that's the other thing here. Is like you don't need to be a martyr. Like, you don't need to drive 8 hours, spend a couple $100 on a hotel, or even get a campsite all rigged up just to sit there and stare at the high muddy water with your 3 weight and think, well, I guess I'm just gonna watch the world go by for the next couple of days. Pack away that spinning rod, pack away that spinning reel, pack away a few lures that are going to allow you, again, as regulations permit, to continue to chase those fish. All right. So that's the first one: high muddy and fast water. The second one, and this is something that I personally was just kind of relieved to allow myself to do, which is, as you are learning to fish from watercraft, it is much easier to reduce variables and fish with spinning gear than it is to fish with fly gear when you are learning how to use a canoe, a kayak, a pontoon, whatever it may be. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if you've ever tried to fly fish out of a small craft that is not drafting much water, so whether that be a float tube or a small kayak, especially like a sit on top kayak, you'll realize that all of the motion that you are imparting onto your fly rod and the amount of motion that's actually imparting onto the watercraft will cause you to drift off course, will cause you to spin around, and it can be a little bit frustrating and even infuriating if you have not spent a lot of time around small watercraft. And so the first time that I experienced this, I was on a little pontoon out in a lake fishing for stripers in South Carolina. So I went out there and I thought, okay, it's a perfectly calm day, and I have my 8 weight and I've got my Clouser minnows. I'm just gonna paddle out there into a big drop off and start casting and just plumb this drop off and see if I can get some fish to chase. Well, with every cast of that 8 weight, every false cast, I would turn about a half of a tick around that clock. So if I made 2 or 3 false casts, I went from facing 12 to facing like 2 o'clock. And as I stripped, I would kind of slowly reorient myself, but I lost a lot of accuracy and distance on that cast because I was trying to compensate for the fact that I was spinning around. Now, there's some things that you can do, but these are things I didn't realize right away. Like, I could have pulled a little bit of air out of those pontoons, and I would have drafted a little bit lower in the water, and I wouldn't have kind of been like a water strider so much. But that's something I didn't realize at first because I was trying to do both things at once. Using spinning gear, you don't have that problem. So years later, I just was really frustrated with the small kayak that I was fishing out of, and I said, you know what, I'm just going to take out spinning gear and I'm going to paddle to a spot and I'm going to fish with that spinning gear. But of course, I got a little bit impatient and started fishing out of that small kayak with the spinning gear and realized I'm not having nearly as many issues with controlling the watercraft and thinking about fishing as I was when I had fly gear. So definitely don't look down on using spinning gear because there are less moving parts. I mean, you consider the back cast and the forward cast are a small flick of the wrist, and you're not going to cause yourself to swivel. And there's also less things to think about and worry about until you're super comfortable in a boat of any sort. Having a bunch of fly line on your waist, even dealing with a 9-foot rod, those are the kind of things that you just might not want to deal with in that moment. I have to say that although I'm not an excellent paddler right now, I do feel totally comfortable taking whether a 3-weight or a 9-weight out on the boat with me. But it took me some time, and I do think that focusing on understanding how to paddle and how to utilize different watercraft with a spinning rod in front of me as opposed to a fly rod was what got me to this point, without really just taking a lot of time to like diligently focus on, all right, let me figure out how to do this. I was able to just fish and be outside and do so in a way that was enjoyable. And having that spinning rod really allowed me to do that. So All right, first thing, high muddy and fast water. Second thing, as you are figuring out watercraft, having a spinning rod might be a good thing. And third, and I would say this one is the most important one and the probably the best one, if you're fishing with kids. If you're fishing with kids on the shore, if you're fishing with kids on a boat, if you want to get a little bit of fishing in, it is a great idea to just have whatever they have. Um, and there's a few reasons for it. One, there's less moving parts with spinning gear. Technically, there's more moving parts if you contemplate all the little gears and everything that goes on the reel, but you know what I mean, just globally speaking. Um, but secondly, I can be fishing and they can get a totally terrible tangle, and I can just hand them my rod as I fix theirs. And there's a good chance that when I hand their rod back to them and they hand my rod back to me, I'm going to be taking tangles out of my rod. But it's that nice, easy switch. Now you could say, "Oh no, my kid's going to fly fish." That's true. My kids fly fish also. But I think one of the most convicting things was we were out on the boat one day and we just brought spinning gear out just to be quick and easy about it. And one of my sons said, "You know, Dad, I like to fly fish, but this is really easy and fun." And I don't want to force, one thing onto my kids. There's a lot of other things in this world that I want for them to understand the dogmatic importance of. But the type of equipment that they use, as long as they're being good stewards of the resource, as long as they're doing it for the right reason, is not one of those battles that I'm going to fight. Um, so that's a great thing for just kind of getting out with them. Again, if you're out on watercraft with the kids, it's a great thing to do to not have to worry about where your 9 foot rod is, where your line is, where they're casting. You can be a lot quicker and you can kind of manipulate things a lot faster and easier if you yourself are using spinning gear alongside of them. And of course, that doesn't mean that has to be the way it is forever, but especially when kids are getting started, it's just nice and easy to have that tight little compact cast and to be able to, cast out, retrieve really relatively quickly. And then also, yeah, you can fly fish while they're using spinning gear, but say you start catching fish on woolly buggers, what are you going to give them where they can start catching the fish? All right, maybe I'm using an inline spinner. Maybe I'm using a Texas rig worm. Maybe I'm using a small crankbait and I'm catching fish. Guess what I can do? I can hand them one or I can clip off what I have and put it on the end of their spin casting rod. And now they are, just the right retrieve away from perfectly imitating what I'm doing. That can't happen if I'm catching fish on a little cork popper or a woolly bugger and they are using spinners and crankbaits. So that's another reason why I think it is worthwhile to have spinning gear in your arsenal. So those are the three top things. Now let me say a quick word on what kind of gear you should contemplate getting if this is not something that you already have on you. First of all, you don't need to spend a ton of money, but just like fly fishing gear, things do get a little bit better as you go up in price. Primarily with it when it comes to the reel, the more metal components that you have, the better. Plastic bodied reels are cheap and they might have some sort of like shiny coating that makes them look like they're metal, but they are going to have lower quality tolerances. And so you're going to have the metal pieces inside are not going to be fitted as snugly, and you're going to it's going to break down faster and easier. So I like to look for a metal body spinning reel. I stick with the well-known brands. You can get kind of their lower end stuff, the Shimano's, the Daiwas, the Abu Garcias, even the Bass Pro Shop branded stuff. Once you get into their mid-price models where things are mostly metal, there can be some plastic components. It's not the worst thing in the world, but the body of the reel itself is metal. Then you're in good shape, and you're talking less than $100 easy. And then for the rod, that really depends on what you're fishing. I like a 6 to 6.5 foot lightweight rod, not ultralight, but also not medium light. I like a lightweight rod that allows me to fish almost any and every situation where I am employing one of the reasons that I was talking about earlier in the podcast. That will cover most panfish and light to medium bass fishing. I can throw a 4 to 6 inch jerkbait for smallmouth and largemouth. I can throw a worm with a small weight if I'm Texas rigged, but I can still throw a small spinner. Or if I wanted to trout fish, I could throw a small spoon with that rod, and I can then retrieve it easily as well. I like fishing with 6 or 8 pound test for those situations, and I think that does anything and everything that you will need to do. I fish with straight up monofilament. I don't get really cute or fancy with braid. I have braid on one of my crappie rods, and on one of my bass rods. But for my kind of lightweight spin fishing, I don't mess with anything besides straight up monofilament. That said, just like with tippet and with leader, trying to find something that has less memory is great, especially if you're not going to be fishing with that rod a whole lot. If that thing's going to be coiled up in tight loops around the spool of that spinning reel, you're going to want it to have not a lot of memory. That way, when you do make the cast, it just goes straight out. Have little coils going for 25 yards out in front of you. And again, not super expensive. I mean, you can get anything and everything that you need for under $200. A good little tackle box full of lures and a rod and a reel and line. And of course, you can go up from that, and you can get away with less, especially if this is a break glass in case of emergency situation. Then yeah, go and get that little clamshell package of rod, reel, line spooled up already, and half a dozen lures, and then you can throw it in the back of your car and be ready. But I like to have something that's going to allow me to actually fish and enjoy it. And so I do have some nicer spinning gear that I can use when the opportunity knocks. So there you go. 3 reasons: high, fast, muddy water, fishing from a watercraft when you're starting off, and then lastly, when you're fishing with kids. Do you have a reason why you like to use spinning gear in these situations? Let me know. Matthew at Casting Across. If you have questions about spinning gear, I've done it quite a bit. I used to do it a lot more when I was younger. I'm doing it a lot more now. I've kind of reverted, I suppose. But again, it still maybe is only 5% of my fishing is with spinning gear. But if you have questions about either integrating into your fly fishing or it in general, you can let me know. And if I don't have an answer, I can send you to somebody who does. So again, Matthew at castingacross.com. This week on the website over at Casting Across, there was a few articles. The first one that came out was called Rusty Flybox Smallmouth. So these Rusty Flybox articles oftentimes appear when I am traveling. And guess what? I was traveling on Monday. And here there are 2 articles and a podcast about smallmouth. So you can check that out over on the website. And then Wednesday's article was a video, What Makes a Good Fly Fishing Vacation Book. So here I feature a book, Fly Fishing a Highland Stream, which is actually it's fishing a Highland Stream, but the guy fly fishes. And I talk about that book, but I also talk about how I got it and why I think it is a great example of a vacation fly fishing book. So you can check that out over on the website, or you can check it out on YouTube, which of course, hopefully you're subscribed to Casting Across over on YouTube. This week's recommendation is another reel from Redington. It's a reel I've been fishing a lot more recently, and it is the Run. I fish it in a 4-weight. I have it on a fiberglass rod, but it is a die-cast reel with just a really beefy drag system. So it weighs virtually nothing, but it is a great little reel for the price. You're talking under $130 for one of the 3 sizes. There's a 3-4, a 5-6, and a 7-8. I fish again the 3-4, and it's a really nice reel. The ergonomics are great. The capacity is not overkill, but it's also allows you to do what you want to do. So definitely check that out. I'll put a link to the Run on the bottom of the show notes for this podcast page over at castingacross.com. I like Redington gear, and I would definitely encourage if you are looking for just higher end stuff to start off with. So hopefully that makes sense. I mean, we're talking about good quality beginner gear, or also just good quality, gear that's affordable. Redington does great stuff, and the Run is a very good cast reel. Cast reels have come so far, both in the components that are used inside of them, the way that they're made, as well as the design of them from a skeleton standpoint. And they are just much more durable than they used to be. And the Run is a great example of. I've been fishing this one for probably 5 or 6 years, and I just really, really enjoy it. Probably got it soon after it came out, and I've just been fishing with it more lately, and I'm just really, really happy. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast app, and then rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.